one year I got a call from a guy, and he was a landlord. He had about, I think he had about 8 houses. I think he had about 8 houses. And each of these houses had different rent. He was getting different rent from each of these houses. And so some of them were renting for 1,500 a month, some were renting for 1,000, some were renting for 900, and then he had one that was renting for like 2,500. So he had this like eclectic group of portfolio of houses that he wanted to sell. So he wanted to sell all of these houses for about, you know what? He did not want to sell all of the houses. I'm sorry. He didn't want to sell all of the houses. He wanted to sell one. He wanted to sell me one of his houses for like, I think he wanted like 150,000 for this house. But during this conversation with him, he told me that he had 7 other houses that he wanted to get rid of because he had a son that was getting ready to graduate. And he said that once his son graduates high school, him, his wife, and his son were going to move to another state. So he wanted to get rid of all of his rentals here. So, he told me that, and I said, well, would you be interested in selling all of your houses? Would you sell the whole portfolio to one person? And he said, yeah, I would be. He said, what do you have in mind? So I hung up on him. Well, I didn't hang up on him, but we got off the phone, and I went through each of his houses on the county records. I went through each one of them, and I realized that all of his houses were worth about $1 million. So his houses were worth about $1 million. And then I calculated what an investor would have to spend on this portfolio to capitalize on this $1 million. So I realized that anywhere between 600,000 to 700,000 would be a good deal for an investor. So an investor would spend this, either one of these amounts, and they would get either 400 in equity here or 300 in equity here. So equity. So if you spend 700 in this scenario, you would have this in equity. If you spend 600 on these properties, on this portfolio, you would have 400,000 in equity. And then you would have the rental income also that's coming in from these properties as well. And I think I had that figured in as well, into these numbers here. It was more than enough. The rental income was more than enough to justify getting like probably a 20 to 30% return on this portfolio. So there was enough. If we would have bought, I think at this price, if you would have bought this portfolio at 600,000, you would have 30% coming in rent. So you would be getting 30%, a 30% return in rent here. And with the 700, if you would have bought it at 700,000, it would have been a 20% return. Both of these are great returns. And then, on top of that, in most cases, if an investor would have, because we ended up not buying this portfolio from this guy, the investor that I tagged to take this on, he was ready. He was ready, and he was really excited about buying it at this price, 600,000. But like I was just getting ready to say before, these would go up exponentially if you get debt. So if you would get a loan, so this would go up crazy. But ideally, this investor, this cash buyer that I tagged to take this on, he was going to get actually he was going to get a HELOC on his other portfolio, because this investor that I tagged to possibly buy this portfolio, he has like 50 or 60 other properties, and he was going to get a HELOC. I think he said he was going to use some cash as well. He was going to use a combination of his cash and a HELOC on his other properties to pay for this portfolio. Because I think he said he was going to sell some properties to make up for his cash and his HELOC. But to get the money right now that he needed, he was going to use a HELOC and some cash. But so I went back to the seller with this price in mind. I went back to the seller and I told him, I said, man, we can give you $600,000 right now today, if you sell us your portfolio. Would you take it? And he was like, that's a good price. That would work. He was interested. I can tell that he was interested. He was like, that would work. But he was like, at the end of the conversation, he was like, I got to think on it. I got to talk to the wife. I got to think on it. And so, he was about to get out the phone, and I told him, I said, man, if you want us to negotiate, we can. So if you have a counter, we're interested. We're interested in a counter, because I think we would have went up to 700,000. We would have went up to 700,000, and I was going to make either between 75K to $100,000 as an assignment fee. So I was going to wholesale this property, this portfolio. It's not a property, it's a portfolio. So this is what I was going to make. You see that? 75,000, $100,000. And this is like one of those random years. This was like maybe 2020 or 2021 or somewhere along, or maybe 2019. It was in those years where I was spending $100 a month on expenses, but I got something like this that came across my desk. And I almost made this that year. The guy never contacted me back, and I sent him some mail, some follow-up mail, a couple times. I even called him again. And when I called him back, he said, we still haven't decided. Our son is still in school, but he's getting out in a couple months, and I'll give you a call. He said he was going to give me a call back, and he never called me back. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think I need to call this guy back. Now that I'm thinking about this deal, I need to call this guy back. And see, that's another problem. You have to set up systems to where you can remember to reach back out to these sellers in these situations. You have to be able to set you up a system. I use my phone most of the time. Sometimes I miss things like this. I'm missing this right now. This guy probably sold his portfolio to someone else because I failed to follow up. You don't want to let that happen to you. That's another thing that you can't really teach that. I guess you can teach it, but it's something that you have to like pick up along the way. Once you realize that you're missing out on this much money, you'll be like, okay, you hit yourself in the head and be like, okay, set you an alarm, man. Even if it's 2 years out, set you an alarm on February the 25th, 2029 to contact this guy and see if he's still interested in selling his house. You have to do that. So look, I was going to make either $75,000 at one time or $100K. And where I am in the part of the United States, this is a lot of money. This is a lot of money, bro. This is a lot of money. But see, that's what I'm saying. That's what I mean by unpredictability. You don't know what you're going to make in any year, doing this. The only predictable thing is having another source of income coming in while you're doing this. But like I was saying before, if I would have quit in 2022 because I had people around me telling me, oh man, you're not making that much money. You're making $5,000, $10,000 in a year. That's not that much money. If I would have listened to these people, these naysayers, these people, these negative people, I would have never ran into this deal. If I would have quit, if those negative people, because I had people being negative during my whole time in real estate. Every year people's like, oh man, you're not making that much. You're not making that much. But what if I would have made this one year? This amount of money here, $75,000 to $100,000. At that time, this would have grown my business exponentially. This would have taken me to another level. This amount of money would have took me to another level. It would take me to where I am now. This would have taken me to where I am now, to where I'm able to buy a property if I wanted to, and fix it up and get into that part of real estate investing, which is flipping and rentals and being a landlord and all that. This would have taken me to another level. So, money is like a time machine. It in this business, it's a time machine. Well, I guess it's in any business. Money is a time machine in this business in particular. This would have taken me to another level if I would have made this. Even though I didn't make the money, I'm not looking at it like, oh man, I didn't make it. This really doesn't work. No, I almost made this. This was like the probability of me making this was because the seller was interested. He didn't just hang up on me and say, no, I want my $1,000,000. No, I want 1,000,000. Are you crazy? He didn't know what his properties were worth. And most of the time you'll run into sellers like that. They don't know what their properties are worth. The probability of me making this was probably a 7 out of 10. That was my probability of making this much money. So will this happen again? Yeah. Will this number right here go up? This 7? Will this go up because I've learned something from this experience? Yes. Your skill level increases year after year. Your skill level will increase every year. So if I come across this again, I'll do something differently, because I will remember this, in my mind. I will remember this deal and do something differently. Maybe I'll talk to the seller more. Maybe I'll follow up better, maybe we'll come up on price. Maybe instead of 600,000, we should have offered him 750. Maybe next time I'll offer 750. Oh, sorry, not 7%, 750%. Maybe I'll offer 750 instead of 700,000. Maybe we'll do this, go up here and get this going and just lock it in, because it was a great deal. We could have sold this whole portfolio for 900,000 if we wanted to sell it at a bargain to quickly get rid of it. We could have sold it for 900,000. If we would have offered 750, we could have sold it for 900,000. That would be 0, 5, 10. So 150. Yeah. So 10, 8, 1. Yeah. So we would have made 150K. I probably would have been modest and took 20K out of this as a finder's fee. The cash buyer would have made 130 grand. You know what I'm saying? Closing costs and all that. If somebody buying a portfolio like this, is most likely going to be another investor. They're going to buy the portfolio and maybe most likely they're going to, if they get a good deal like this, where we're leaving them $100,000 in equity in the deal. We leaving them net in the deal. So they got $100,000 in there, the day of, and my cash buyer is making 130 just on a regular day, just getting a call from me and being, so if this would have worked, this cash buyer would have made 130K that day just off of a call from me, just knowing me, and I would have made 20K, not that much as he made, but look, you got to know your position. You got to know your position, bro. You got to know your position. You playing the middleman, as a wholesaler, you the middleman. So, this person right here, your cash buyer, is taking all the risk. He or she is buying the property. They're buying the whole thing and taking on all the risk. There could be some issues there. There could be some issues there. They're taking all the risks, so it's only right for them to make the most of the money, them and the sellers, what I'm saying? I guess at the end of the day, the seller it's only right. No one gets angry if the seller is making a lot of money. we're the buy as buyers, we're happy to take away $100,000 or $20,000. You know, just going into the deal and managing it. Basically, the seller is making the decision to sell and get and make everybody money. They're making the decision, so it's all up to them. So it's only right if they get a lot of money, no one is angry. Because them making a decision, so them sometimes I think faster, I talk faster than I think. So the seller making the decision to sell, it makes us money. It puts money in our pocket as well. So you have to know your position, bro. You have to know your position. This is how a lot of wholesalers fail, man. I would imagine. I don't know. I'm not the Census Bureau. I don't know. Not playing your position where you are in your investing career. Look at this difference. You look at this difference. People will be outraged. Some people will be outraged. Oh, how you making? How the cash buyer come in, and they're just writing a check, and they're making 130,000. I'm just making 20. You would think that you are getting pennies here. You're getting pennies. But you didn't have to do nothing, bro. You didn't have to do hardly nothing. Your position is valuable. Don't get me wrong. Your position as a wholesaler or a bird dogger for that matter. These positions are very valuable. They make this whole thing work. Your piece, you're the centerpiece of the puzzle. Without you, there wouldn't be a picture. You should be rewarded, but you have to get rewarded based on, it has to be relative to your part in the deal. You were the person that the seller talked to first. You negotiated it. You got the property under contract. You made, like in this case, like I made the decision to ask this seller to sell his entire portfolio. I went through each property and figured out that the portfolio was worth about $1 million. And then I made the decision to offer him 600,000. And mind you, I'm still kind of new. I'm a couple years in, and I'm like offering these big numbers because I realized, after a couple years, it's all numbers. Don't be afraid of these big numbers, 600,000, $1 million. All this crap you'll learn from other investors as well. These numbers, they're just that. They're just numbers. Don't be afraid of these big numbers or offering these big numbers. So I went back and offered this guy six. I said, we'll take the entire portfolio for 600 grand today, and we'll pay for your closing costs as well. And he was just, when I hit him with that, I don't know if it's rare that people get offered that much money, like, in that way. I'm sure people, around the nation, but in the area that I'm in, I would imagine that it's kind of rare that these homeowners, these sellers get offered this much. They put their property up for sale, and they know, and they're expecting to get that much when they put their property up for sale, but out of nowhere, just out of the blue, like, you talking to a guy, like in this case, this seller was just talking to a guy, me, and I just offered him 600,000. I kind of convinced him to sell his whole portfolio, and I was just like, "What if you sell the whole the portfolio? Would you do it?" And he was like, "Yeah, I guess I would. Everything is for sale, right?" That's what the guy said, and I was like, "Okay." And I, did my calculations, called him back. I'll give you $600,000 for it right now, today. And he paused for a minute. I would imagine, people just aren't used to that. Even though they have properties and they're worth a certain amount, when you buying properties, you're really not coming out a lot on cash, on your own cash. These properties, they go up in value, and people don't really look at equity like it's cash. They just think of it like, it's just something that's just out there, and you hear about it and you like it or whatever, but it's not cash money in your pocket. And some people just think that about equity, but it's really cash, bro. It's an asset, and that's the value of that's the money that's in the asset. If you sell it, you can get that money out of it. You can get that equity out of it, and it can turn into cash. People don't look at equity like it's cash. It's cash, bro. It's cash. But like I'm saying, I'm young. I'm young in the sense of my experience level in real estate, and I'm throwing these numbers. It's all a numbers game. It's all numbers, but you have to know your role. You know what I'm saying? You have to know where you fit in. And like I was explaining a little bit earlier, I put everything together, but I did not take on the risk associated with buying a property or a portfolio in this situation. There's risks that come with writing that check and putting your name on that check, signing it, and saying, I'll take everything. I'll take the properties. There's risk. You're the owner now, so you're taking on a lot of responsibility. You're taking on everything. Not only easements and all that, you also taking on things that are attached to the property, like liens and things like that. You definitely want to get some title insurance when you're buying properties. But there could be some things that's hidden. They don't really catch everything. But if they don't catch everything, that's why you got title insurance. So you can, if something does come up during your ownership of the property, you can call title insurance and they'll try to handle it. But things can come up, things can come up, bro. And so they're taking on all the risks. So it's only right for them. They're the second person in the deal that deserves the most money. First is the seller, first is the seller. I'm trying to think of where to write this. So the seller, then the buyer, the end buyer, and then you, as far as like who gets the most money. You are last. You're not taking hardly any risk. You're just getting money and you're walking away with that 20K. Whether or not this cash buyer makes actually, if everything sells and everybody walks away from the closing table with their checks, then the deal is done. But sometimes you'll run into cash buyers who would like to pay you. They're so happy with your work, they would like to pay you your cut early. Now, are those cash buyers smart? Not really. And will you run into cash buyers like that a lot? No. Usually you will only get paid after they close on the property. But sometimes you'll have these investors who will give you the check, and you would be smart to just hold that check. If they do give you this money before the deal closes, you will be smart to hold that check and not spend it until the deal closes. You would be smart to do that. Would be very prudent of you, because if this deal does not close, the cash buyer is going to ask for their 20 grand back or whatever they gave you before the closing. They're going to ask for that back, and you better have it to give it to them. Okay. This is a business, bro. This is a business. Your reputation is a business. Your reputation is the product. You want to make sure that you get some good reviews on your reputation. Okay, so but look, this is where you fall right here. This doesn't mean you're not important. You're still in the big three. You know what I'm saying? You're still in the big three, but you just get paid the least amount because of your role. One day you'll be here, and one day you'll be here. One day you'll be in all of these positions. One day you'll be in all these positions, and you'll understand this ladder. You'll understand you'll understand that. But anyway, making money in real estate when you start out, it's unpredictable. And even, as you go on, if you're going to have a career in flipping and restoration of properties, renovation of properties, and all that, the income is unpredictable, because you're going to go through another situation like where we're in right now in the markets, where we have high interest rates. So there's not a lot of people selling properties, and there's not a lot of people buying properties right now. Houses are sitting on the market for longer, because buyers are they're able to be picky now. So you're going to go through these ups and downs, these valleys and peaks, these expansions and recessions in the real estate market. And you have to be able to adapt to that. You have to find some kind of strategy that works so you can stay in the business. Because one day, my overarching point is, there's going to be an opportunity that comes that's going to change your life. there's going to be opportunities like these right here that will change your life. This opportunity just popped across my desk because I never gave up. I kept going. I'm still going to this day because I know that things like this can happen. This is what keeps me going. You know what I'm saying? Because one day you can be making nothing for 4 years, nothing, $1,000, maybe you net $1,000 one year, and then you net $2,000 the next year. And then the next year, maybe you net 10,000. That fourth year, you may run into a situation like this and net 100,000 or $600,000. You may net that because you have more experience. You got your money. You saving your money. The experience is the main thing. So you don't know what you're going to make. You could make this in a year, one of these years. You probably was making. You probably was going on 4 or 5 years, and you was making $50,000, $60,000 every year in real estate, and then one year you end up getting this big whale. I call this is a whale. This is a colossal blue whale from where I am right now in my investing career. $1 million, making $1 million in a year unexpectedly, that would be a colossal plus in my business for most people. So that's why I stick to it, because I know that this can happen. One of these years, this can happen, and then it's over. You know what I'm saying? Then my life has changed. It has changed. With the little bit of money I've been making every year for the last 9 years, it has changed for the better. Just making that. So that's all I want to talk about today is the unpredictability of real estate.